There's a two-letter word that Donald Trump hates more than any other, the word no. Since the earliest days of his second administration, the courts have said no. His first legal defeat actually came on January 23rd, just 3 days after his inauguration, when a judge blocked his order ending birthright citizenship for those born to undocumented immigrants. Since then, there have been at least 187 rulings that have, at least temporarily, paused Donald Trump's policies and orders. Countless lawmakers have stood up and said no. Cory Booker spent 25 hours and 5 minutes saying no, laying out his opposition to nearly every facet of Trump 2.0 in what was the longest speech ever delivered on the floor of the U.S. Senate. Even the world's richest man and Donald Trump's biggest political benefactor, Elon Musk, found his way to no. His red line, his breaking point, was Donald Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill. And now the American people in historic numbers have spoken up and said no in a day of nationwide protests that broke all records. Organizers say more than 5 million people turned out for the No Kings protest on Saturday. That was also the day of Donald Trump's birthday. According to one data analyst, it may have been the single biggest day of demonstrations in our country's history. 50,000 people showed up in New York City. 70,000 people marched in Seattle, Washington. In Los Angeles, where protests have been taking place all week against Donald Trump's immigration policies, as well as his deployment of the National Guard against the wishes of that state's governor and Los Angeles city mayor, more than 200,000 people protested. This was the scene in Philadelphia, where 80,000 people were seen marching down the Ben Franklin Parkway, waving flags and chanting. Over in San Francisco, people formed a human banner that spelled out "No King" on the shores of Ocean Beach. And it wasn't just some blue state or blue city phenomenon. In deep red Idaho, thousands of people showed up in front of the Idaho Capitol building. In Livingston, Montana, population 9,000, hundreds of people lined the streets there. Even in Minnesota, where local officials urged people to skip the protests because the gunman who shot and killed a Democratic state lawmaker and wounded another was at large. He was on the loose. Even there, nearly 25,000 people gathered outside the state capitol anyway. One person telling the Minneapolis Star-Tribune this, quote, "These people are trying to do what they can for their communities, for the state, for the nation. The urgency of the moment, the severity of the threat Donald Trump poses to American democracy was something you heard from nearly every protest in every corner of our country."
Was there a certain point in which you decided you needed to take, and what was that point?
Just arresting all the immigrants with no trials.
Pat, was there?
Yeah, that's similar, right? Seeing the images of masked people coming and taking people away with no due process.
We are here. We're not going anywhere. Okay, we serve this country right here. Look, I give my life to this country, but we got to do it right. Not for this jerk, not for this guy.
Protesting on behalf of someone?
Yes, and also because this is against the Constitution. I feel like it's deeper than just deporting immigrants. It's going against our rights as people and especially as American citizens.
I feel energized and I feel hopeful to be here around so many other like-minded citizens standing up and protecting our democracy.
Well, we haven't had a king since 1776. We want to keep it that way.
A nationwide wave of mass protests as the American people's birthday gift to Donald Trump is where we start today. Host of the Bulwark podcast, MSNBC political analyst Tim Miller is here. Also joining us, former U.S. Senator, MSNBC political analyst Claire McCaskill's here. But first, I'm going to start with Democratic Congressman from Maryland, Jamie Raskin. He spoke at the No Kings event in Philadelphia. Let me play a little bit of that, Congressman, before we start.
No, you don't get to be a monarch or a dictator in America, and you don't get to be on the payroll of monarchs and dictators from other countries. Sorry, Donald, you don't get to keep the millions of dollars you've pocketed from Saudi Arabia, from China, from the United Arab Emirates or Qatar. You've got to return all the money your golf courses and country clubs have gotten from the Secret Service, the Department of Defense and Commerce, and so on. Our government is not your personal ATM machine.
Congressman, I watched some of that, and I've seen more clips online. It was a soaring speech, and the reaction was incredible. Just take me inside what it was like to give that speech, and if there was anything in the crowd's reaction that surprised you.
Well, it was exhilarating, Nicole, to be in Philadelphia with, 100,000, 125,000 people marching in the street. I got to marched the last couple of blocks with people when I arrived in Philadelphia, and Tim Snyder was there, and Martin Luther King III was there. It was just very moving, and there's this sense of the people all across the country taking our government back, defending our Constitution. And there's no way Donald Trump could organize rallies and marches like that across the country. So there was definitely something thrilling about the moment. And for me, returning to first principles, because Philadelphia, of course, is where it all started with the Declaration and the Constitution. And, the first three words of the Constitution refute everything Donald Trump's been trying to do. We, the people, we don't have kings here. We don't have monarchs and queens and dictators. And we don't allow our presidents to engage in financial relationships with governments all over the world. That's right in the Constitution, the ban on foreign government emoluments, the ban on titles of nobility. So, I said none of us will ever get to be founding fathers in the 18th century, but we can be founding fighters in the 21st.
I love that. I mean, I also noticed the response to what we shorthand as grift, but the corruption. I mean, I mean, for those of us who've been covering Trump for 9 years, he's been doing it the whole time, but there is something more brazen. There is something more directly transactional about the second presidency. And I wonder what your thoughts are about how much the public has taken in that for Trump, this is about enriching himself and enriching his family.
I mean, there's the $400 million Bribe Force One jet from Qatar. Completely brazen, totally in violation of the Constitution if you don't come to Congress first. There's also the fact that Donald Trump, who denounced crypto as just saturated with criminality, now has completely embraced it and created his own crypto meme coin, which is just this gaping open barn door for every anonymous foreign state dictator, king, prince, mafia ring, or pardon seeker to pour money directly into Donald Trump's pockets. And so, whatever kind of varnish they had from the first administration is completely off now. They're not even pretending to do anything else. I mean, their first foreign trip was back to Saudi Arabia in the Middle East, not for any, peace-seeking purposes or no foreign policy agenda. It was a bunch of business deals. It was a business trip. So look, corruption is the opposite of democracy. Democracy is the system which advances the idea that every single person matters and we all rise together. The opposite of that is a corrupt monarchical or dictatorial system where you have a tiny group in society that uses public resources and private resources just to benefit themselves. And that's what we've got now. It's a gangster state.
It's a gangster state. That's amazing. I mean, the number of signs opposing the immigration tactics was, to me, heartening, because I feel like the right has done a good job sowing a false narrative that immigration is Trump's issue and that Democrats are on defense if they're even talking about it. But it turns out a lot of people were in the streets saying that absolutely no one should be deported without due process. No one should be snatched off the street by men or women with masks on who disappear them into a van. Nobody wants that. What are you guys talking about as a party about the opportunities around immigration?
Well, you're right that people understand that either we have constitutional rights and protections for everybody in the country, or we don't have any at all. And that's why due process are the two most beautiful words in the English language. They separate our freedoms from the arbitrary power of the state. But I think Donald Trump gave the whole game away on Thursday, where apparently after meetings with his Secretary of Agriculture and hearing from a bunch of large agribusiness executives and companies, he said, we are no longer going to be deporting people from farm states, meaning undocumented immigrants, because that's the backbone of that industry. And he said, these are good people who've been working hard, and they deserve better than just being rounded up and kicked out of the country. It was amazing to hear him say that, but obviously he'd heard from an important ingredient in his political coalition. But that unravels the entire argument for what they've been doing, for the whole destruction of our Constitution. If these are good, hardworking people who are looking for a way in to America in farm country and in the hospitality and hotel industry, as he said, why not also in the construction sector? Why not also in landscaping and restaurants and so on? But now he's pivoting to just make it a war against democratic cities. And he's not even talking about immigration so much anymore. He just wants those scenes of violent confrontation between a federalized National Guard or the Marines and people who live in cities that have Democratic mayors or states that have Democratic governors. I mean, that's much more of an agenda to create a political civil war in America. And that's exactly what the vast majority of American people don't want. So I think that we're getting to that moment of the emperor has no clothes at all, because he seems to be calling off that idea of the mass deportation. And look, I welcome that. I think we should come together and talk about a bipartisan immigration reform bill that everybody in the country can get behind at this point.